The history of Hollywood is filled with expensive failures, but some movies lose so much money that they become legendary. These are the films that didn't just disappoint audiences, they left studios facing losses of tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. One of the most famous examples came from Eddie Murphy. The early 2000s were a transitional period in Murphy's career. After years of success as an edgy comedian, he was becoming a family-friendly movie star thanks to hits like Dr. Dolittle and his scene-stealing performance as Donkey in Shrek. Hoping to capitalize on that momentum, Warner Brothers backed an ambitious sci-fi comedy called The Adventures of Pluto Nash. Released in 2002, the film followed Murphy as a nightclub owner living on the moon in the year 2087. When gangsters try to take over his business, Pluto finds himself caught in a bizarre adventure involving crime bosses, robots, and futuristic conspiracies. The movie's production was troubled from the start. Delays pushed back its release for years, and the budget eventually climbed to around $100 million. By the time it finally arrived in theaters, audiences had little interest in seeing it. The result was disastrous. The Adventures of Pluto Nash earned only about $7.1 million worldwide, making it one of the biggest box office bombs ever released by a major studio. Critics overwhelmingly rejected it, and the film quickly became a punchline in Hollywood. Fortunately, Murphy took the failure in stride. During an interview with Barbara Walters, he joked that he personally knew the 2 or 3 people who actually liked the movie. Another ambitious project learned that lesson the hard way. Based on Philip Reeve's popular novels, Mortal Engines imagined a distant future where gigantic mobile cities roamed the earth, consuming smaller towns for resources. Produced by Peter Jackson and directed by Christian Rivers, the film featured some of the most creative world-building seen in a blockbuster in years. At the center of the story was Hester Shaw, a young woman seeking revenge against the powerful leader responsible for her mother's death. The film's moving cities, impressive visual effects, and large-scale action sequences gave audiences something they had never seen before. But originality alone wasn't enough. Mortal Engines reportedly cost between $100 million and $150 million to produce. Unfortunately, it earned only $83.7 million worldwide. A major reason for its failure was timing. The movie opened in December 2018, the same weekend that Spider-Man: Into the Spider-Verse debuted in theaters. While Spider-Verse became a critical and commercial sensation, Mortal Engines quickly disappeared from cinemas. By the end of its run, Universal was believed to have lost around $175 million on the project. It's a reminder that even stunning visuals and ambitious storytelling can't guarantee success when audiences choose another movie instead. Hollywood has always loved origin stories, but sometimes audiences aren't interested in seeing where a character came from. That was the problem facing Pan. Released in 2015, the film attempted to reinvent the Peter Pan myth by telling the story of how Peter first arrived in Neverland. Warner Brothers hoped the movie would launch a new fantasy franchise and invested heavily in the production. With a reported budget of around $150 million, Pan featured large-scale visual effects, flying pirate ships, and Hugh Jackman playing the villainous Blackbeard. On paper, it had all the ingredients of a family blockbuster. But audiences weren't convinced. Critics criticized the film's tone and storytelling, while viewers struggled to connect with its darker reimagining of a classic children's tale. The movie seemed caught between appealing to younger audiences and attracting older viewers, ultimately satisfying neither group. When its theatrical run ended, Pan had earned only about $129 million worldwide. The film became another major loss for Warner Brothers and quietly ended any hopes of building a larger franchise around its version of Neverland. If Pluto Nash proved that star power couldn't save a bad movie, Terminator: Dark Fate showed that even a beloved franchise can run out of steam. After the disappointing performance of Terminator: Genisys in 2015, Paramount hoped to revive the series by bringing back some familiar faces. James Cameron returned as a producer and story consultant, while Linda Hamilton reprised her iconic role as Sarah Connor for the first time since Terminator 2. The film ignored most of the previous sequels and positioned itself as the true continuation of the franchise's most beloved entries. Fans were excited, critics were generally positive, and the studio believed it had finally found the formula to restore Terminator's former glory. Unfortunately, moviegoers didn't show up. With a production budget estimated between $185 million and $196 million, Dark Fate needed a massive global audience to succeed. Instead, it earned only about $261 million worldwide. Once marketing and distribution costs were included, industry analysts estimated losses of more than $120 million. The disappointing performance effectively ended plans for another Terminator trilogy. Looking back on the failure, James Cameron admitted that the franchise simply struggled to attract younger viewers. The people who grew up with Terminator were getting older, while newer audiences had little connection to characters created decades earlier. Sometimes nostalgia isn't enough to save a franchise. That honor might belong to Battleship. If Battleship proved that throwing money at a strange concept doesn't guarantee success, Cutthroat Island showed how a single movie can bring down an entire studio. Released in 1995, the pirate adventure was produced by Carolco Pictures, the company behind major hits like Terminator 2 and the Rambo franchise. At the time, Carolco was already facing financial difficulties, but executives believed Cutthroat Island could be the blockbuster that saved the company. The studio invested heavily in the project. After multiple script revisions and casting changes, Geena Davis and Matthew Modine were brought in as the film's leads. Massive practical sets were constructed, elaborate ship battles were filmed, and production costs continued to climb. By the time filming wrapped, estimates placed the budget somewhere between $92 million and $150 million, an enormous amount for the mid-1990s. Carolco then spent even more money promoting the movie, hoping it would become a holiday hit. Instead, it became a disaster. Critics were largely unimpressed, audiences stayed away, and the film earned only around $60 million worldwide. The losses were devastating. Carolco soon filed for bankruptcy and shut down, making Cutthroat Island one of the most financially destructive movies ever released. Its failure also scared studios away from pirate films for years, until Pirates of the Caribbean proved the genre could still be profitable. A few years later, another ambitious project would discover that technological innovation alone isn't enough to sell tickets. Released in 2001, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within was a groundbreaking achievement in computer animation. Based on the popular Final Fantasy video game franchise, it was marketed as the first photorealistic CGI feature film ever produced. Director Hironobu Sakaguchi envisioned the movie as more than just a game adaptation. He hoped its lead character, Dr. Aki Ross, would become a digital actress capable of appearing in future movies, commercials, and video games. The technology behind the film was extraordinary for its time. More than 200 artists worked for nearly 4 years creating realistic digital humans and highly detailed environments. Unfortunately, all that innovation came at a cost. The budget eventually reached approximately $137 million. Despite impressive visuals, audiences didn't connect with the story. Many Final Fantasy fans were disappointed that the movie featured original characters rather than beloved figures from the games. General moviegoers, meanwhile, weren't sure what the film was supposed to be. The Spirits Within earned only about $85 million worldwide, resulting in massive losses for Square Pictures. The studio was eventually shut down, ending one of the most ambitious experiments in animation history. The Flash should have been one of the easiest superhero movies ever made. After all, the character is one of DC Comics' most recognizable heroes. But the road to bringing him to the big screen turned into a nightmare. The film spent years in development, cycling through multiple directors and numerous script rewrites. Then came a series of highly publicized controversies involving star Ezra Miller. At the same time, Warner Bros. Was restructuring its entire DC cinematic universe, leaving the Flash caught between competing visions of the franchise's future. Even after filming ended, major changes continued during post-production. Critics later complained about visual effects that often looked unfinished, while audiences struggled to connect with a universe that was already being rebooted. Warner Bros. Hoped nostalgia would save the day. The return of Michael Keaton as Batman generated enormous excitement among longtime fans. But it wasn't enough. Despite costing between $200 million and $220 million, The Flash earned only about $271 million worldwide. Industry estimates suggest the studio ultimately lost between $155 million and $200 million on the film. One of the most anticipated superhero movies of the decade had become one of its biggest financial disappointments. And yet, even that wasn't enough to earn the title of Hollywood's strangest blockbuster failure. Then came a movie built around a question almost nobody was asking. What if the moon suddenly started falling toward Earth? That premise formed the basis of Moonfall, Roland Emmerich's 2022 disaster epic. Emmerich had previously directed successful large-scale spectacles like Independence Day, The Day After Tomorrow, and 2012, so audiences knew they could expect plenty of destruction. Moonfall certainly delivered that. The film featured collapsing cities, giant tidal waves, and a global extinction-level threat unlike anything seen in reality. Unfortunately, many viewers felt the premise was simply too ridiculous to take seriously. Social media users mocked the concept long before the movie even arrived in theaters. Despite carrying a production budget of roughly $150 million, Moonfall generated only $67.3 million worldwide. Even more alarming, just $19 million came from North America. The film was beaten during its opening weekend by Jackass Forever, a movie that reportedly cost only a fraction as much to make. For a disaster movie about the end of the world, Moonfall became a disaster of a very different kind. But perhaps the saddest story on this list belongs to Titan AE. Before the year 2000, Don Bluth had established himself as one of animation's most respected filmmakers. He directed classics like The Secret of Nim, An American Tail, The Land Before Time, and Anastasia, creating films that often competed directly with Disney. Titan AE was his attempt to enter the science fiction genre. Set centuries in the future after Earth has been destroyed by an alien race known as the Dredge, the film follows a young man searching for a spacecraft capable of creating a new home for humanity. The movie featured impressive animation, ambitious action sequences, and a talented cast that included Matt Damon, Bill Pullman, Drew Barrymore, Nathan Lane, and several other recognizable actors. Yet audiences barely showed up. Produced for somewhere between $75 million and $90 million, Titan AE earned only about $36.8 million worldwide. According to industry estimates, the film ultimately lost around $100 million for 20th Century Fox. The consequences were severe. Fox Animation Studios shut down shortly after the film's release, and Don Bluth never directed another theatrical feature film. It's a fitting way to end this list because Titan AE represents something many of these movies have in common. Most weren't made by untalented people. Many featured visionary directors, impressive casts, groundbreaking technology, and enormous budgets. But in Hollywood, none of that guarantees success. Sometimes audiences embrace a movie. And sometimes they leave $100 million crater in a studio's balance sheet.